Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. I am so glad you're here with me today. Today, we're talking about another great topic, living your whole self. Before we get into this topic, and I tell you all of my thoughts, the what, the why, and the how about living your whole self, I want to introduce myself just in case you're a new listener. I am Laurel Boivin. I am co-host of the Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life podcast. My podcast partner, Laurel Holland, is not here with me today, but she'll be back in coming weeks in future episodes to carry on these conversations with me and you. In addition to being co-host of the Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life podcast, I am a life and leadership coach. And Laurel is too. I'll make sure that you have our contact information in the show notes, just in case you want to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you want to continue this conversation in a different way. So let's talk about, what does living your whole self even mean? As I was getting ready to bring this conversation to you, my thoughts were swirling in my head, as they usually do when I'm preparing to talk about inner work topics. Let's see, where do I even start? The things that were coming to mind were authenticity, vulnerability, values, boundaries, self-awareness, self-reflection, quiet time, really getting to know yourself. Those things really, for me, tie into living my whole self. What does living your whole self mean to you? Let's talk about what it is. Living your whole self really is embracing authenticity, being true to who you are, true to what you believe, and true to how you want to live, really being intentional, thoughtful, and that takes self-awareness. So, how are you doing embracing authenticity? Are you able to show up authentically with your own opinions, values, beliefs, priorities? Or do you get lost in what other people need and want, who other people want you to be? Just a question for you to think about today. So why? Why is living your whole self so important? I want to say that being authentic, being true to yourself, it really is essential for fulfillment. Now, if you find yourself not fulfilled, it may be because you are neglecting your true self, because you don't know your true self well enough yet. When we can really know ourselves and live as our true selves, regardless of what's happening around us or what other people need or want, when we can be true to ourselves, our values, I have to say it's very empowering. You're able to create a life, an intentional life that you want when you are authentic. So let's talk about the how. How is it possible to be authentic, to remain authentic, when there's so many pressures for us to be who others need us to be, to make sure other people are happy? Many, many pressures to show up differently than in our true, authentic self. So let's start with values and beliefs. Do you know your values? When I think about this, I've spent years really trying to refine and get clear on my values. For many, many years, I thought I valued things like honesty and open communication and trust and authenticity. But when I did this work more recently in the last few years, I tried really hard to come up with, what are my three top values? Three. It's almost impossible to choose from so many things that I value and focus only on three. But as I did that work, what I came up with was community, connection, and contribution. And getting clear about my values allowed me to create a filter for what I wanted to say yes to and what I need to say no to. And it gave me permission to focus on my values and to decline opportunities and requests that didn't meet my values. They weren't aligned with my values. So if you need to do values work, if you want to get clear about what your values are, I'm going to tell you it's such important work. And Laurel and I are here to help you. You may want to do that work alone. You might want to do that work with trusted companions and friends, but do the work however it feels right for you. Recently, when I was talking to my husband about getting clear on his values and what were his top 3 or 5 values, he really didn't know. He said he'd have to think about it for a little while. He knows many more than just 3 or 5. He knows what he values in his life. But when the question is posed, what are your 3 top values? He had a hard time coming up with them on the spot. And let's be honest, I put him on the spot. So I asked him if he could guess what were among my 3 top values. And he thought for a minute and he admitted that he probably didn't know all 3 or couldn't guess 3, but he knew that connection was in my top values. And that made me, I don't know, proud maybe, made me feel good about I'm living my values. If other people, including my husband, can see just by my actions and how I show up every day that connection is one of my top values, it was something to be proud about. So that's the question I have about your values and beliefs. In order to be authentic, you have to begin to know your values and your beliefs. You have to be able to demonstrate and show up in alignment with your values and beliefs. And again, that requires self-reflection. The second thing I think that is really important as you are working on being more authentic is to appreciate your own uniqueness, right? To start to look at what makes you you and how can you lean into that? How can you take pride in that? How can you show up as appreciating yourself in all everything, in your good, your bad, your ugly, your specialness, your quirkiness, whatever it is that makes you you. And that leads me to think about integrity. Are you acting in integrity, right? How can you be authentic if you are not someone who acts in integrity? Being honest with yourself, that is not always easy, or with others. How can you act in integrity, be honest? Can you make decisions based on your values? When I think about living in alignment with your values, are you making your day-to-day decisions and choices based on your values? And then are you taking responsibility for your actions, your choices, your beliefs, your opinions, your values? Are you treating those things in a responsible way, honoring those things? And then there's self-compassion. When I think about self-compassion, this sometimes can be hard. We often are not compassionate with ourselves. So how can you be more self-compassionate? Can you accept your imperfections? Can you admit that you are not perfect and the world is okay with you showing up in your imperfect self, especially if it's aligned with your values, if you are being authentic? Authenticity allows for imperfection. And then loving all of your parts. When I think about this, we had an episode a couple weeks ago here on Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life about loving all of your parts. If you haven't listened to it already, I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. How can you befriend all of your parts? How can you stop shaming and shunning some of your parts? Because it is all of our parts in the messy mix of complexity, maybe, of all that we are. When we can learn to acknowledge and appreciate our pieces and parts in a more holistic way, we can be more authentic. Self-expression is another one. When I think about how can you show up authentically if you are not brave enough to live in the world as a self-expressive individual, right? Can you be seen and be heard? Are you willing to be seen? Are you willing for all of your parts to be seen? Can you speak about your beliefs and your values, your opinions, even if they might be different than other people? So when you can become more self-expressive and trust that you're in a safe space as you express yourself, you can be more authentic. Boundaries, we can't talk about values without talking about boundaries. As I mentioned, values become a filter. For me, they serve as a filter for what I want to say yes to or what I should say yes to and what I happily will decline. We have so many choices every day. And if we are not intentional about our choices and intentional about establishing boundaries as a way to protect our life from taking on a life of its own, right? Of living someone else's life. When we don't have boundaries, when we have weak boundaries, when we say yes to things that we should be saying no to because they're not in alignment with our values, yet we don't have the boundary to protect our values, we end up living an inauthentic life. When I think about boundaries, oftentimes we worry about letting other people down or what people will think of us if we say no. We want people to be pleased. We want to keep harmony. We want to keep peace among whatever group we're with. But our boundaries help us to protect what is most important to us. Boundaries help us thrive because then we start living life that we want to live rather than feeling resentful or, I don't know, cranky that other people's priorities are dictating your life. And in all of that, when I think another piece of being authentic and living more authentically really is about creating safe space, safe circles, right? Finding your tribe, finding your people. How can you surround yourself with people who they're willing and they're able to love you in all situations. They appreciate all of your parts. They encourage you to be yourself. They appreciate your uniqueness. And so that safe space is really, really important because uplifting relationships that encourage us to change and grow, those relationships help us become better versions of ourselves, maybe more present versions of ourselves. I love the relationships that don't require or force you to stay in a version of yourself that you have outgrown, right? The thing about authenticity is when we allow ourselves to change and grow, our values may change and grow. Our boundaries may shift to better represent what we want now, what's important to us. So how can you create that safe space? And I can't help but think about my nervous system when I think about creating a safe space. Sometimes being vulnerable feels uncomfortable. And vulnerability is part of being authentic. We can't be authentic unless we begin to reveal our true nature, our true self, our opinions, our beliefs, our values. And so being vulnerable takes courage. It's a brave act. And it also might activate your nervous system. It may not feel safe. So when I think about creating safety and maybe the resistance that you feel, they go hand in hand. You will feel resistance if you do not feel safe. You might avoid being vulnerable or showing up authentically. So know that that might be your nervous system. Know that that resistance is a good messenger for you to pay attention and think, oh, do I have safety? Do I feel safe in this place with these people? Are they the right ones to share my innermost worries, fears, insecurities, quirkiness, all of the things? So that creating a safe space is really important to better manage your nervous system. And then the other piece I really want to think about is this lifetime journey, right? This self-awareness, this self-becoming, this living more authentically, stepping into your beliefs, your values, creating boundaries. All of that is a practice that begins with self-reflection, brings in some self-awareness, some self-knowledge, some self-knowing, some grace to allow yourself to be, to allow yourself to change and grow, and to accept that we aren't the same person that we were yesterday or last week or last year or last decade, right? We are not the same person. So are you willing to step into this quest to live authentically, to create your beautiful life by living your complete being, living your wholeness, loving all your parts? Are you able and willing to take on this lifetime journey? The benefits are so incredible. You can just start slow if you need to. When I think about self-reflection, if it's not comfortable for you because you don't want to look inside, there are many ways we can do this. I think about journaling. I'm a lifetime journaler. Many of you have heard that before. Journaling, sometimes we don't want our words on paper because we don't want anyone to see them. But journaling helps you to process your thoughts, your fears, your emotions, really helps you get clarity about who you are and what you want. You know, I call it journaling. Sometimes it's just list making. And if you're afraid that someone else is going to see your words on paper, you can write and burn the paper. You can go for a walk and talk to yourself out loud. There's something about speaking out loud that helps us get clear about what is important to us. So, really thinking about the recap of how can you live your whole being in this wholeness? Authenticity is critically important. Authenticity takes vulnerability, right? It takes self-reflection. It takes clarity, getting clarity about your values. It takes setting boundaries and embracing your true self, acknowledging what you want, what you are worthy of. And this is where I just want to go back 1 second to this safe space and creating your circles. People who really do appreciate your true self and allow you to be that without judgment, right? Without shame. That makes the vulnerability even easier. So, integrity, self-compassion, supportive relationships, those are all parts along the way on the journey to living more authentically, living your whole self. You'll find, again, my contact information and Laurel's in the show notes. I will link to the previous episode about loving all your parts. You may find some journal prompts in the show notes as well. And I look forward to hearing from you, hearing about your journey and how this conversation resonated with you. We'll be back. Laurel and I will be back in the future. We will be talking about truth telling. And this is such a great topic. Living your truth, telling your truth, being your truth. It dovetails so nicely with authenticity, right? How can you show up living your full self and living your truth, telling your truth, acknowledging your truth, getting clarity about your truth. So I'm looking forward to those conversations, and I hope you'll join us again. Thank you again for being with me. It is always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. Bye for now.